Right, where are we? Bought a 500,000 kilometre Landcruiser, drove it from Pretoria in South Africa down to Cape Town, Polmarsh and US Neyman, took it for a test drive, then climbed underneath it and had another good look. And after all this, I've concluded that
I'm now prepared and happy to spend a lot of time and effort and money on getting it right, because the foundation is obviously good. So I'm really excited about what we can turn this into.
So now we have to dismantle it. You can see what 500,000 kilometres looks like, and then share with you the process of deciding what we're going to repair, what we're going to replace in our project to turn this Landcruiser into a long-distance Africa tourer.
Need to get all of us.
Yeah. As disassembly progresses at some speed, Sean has spent a good morning listing everything that he can find that needs to be sorted, fixed, repaired or replaced. But we're going to start the list with Paul showing us the wear and tear on the hub axles and wheel bearings.
This is where you really do uncover some of the wear items, and quite common on these vehicles. When you take off the bearings, there's a shoulder here. Now the inside part of the bearing ends up rubbing against the shoulder because it actually doesn't grip anymore on the stub axle. And then you'll find here also, as the dust and dirt gets in, it creates a groove. So the seal, your seal actually, the dust comes in from the back and then eventually acts like grinding paste and cuts a groove in here, and there's quite a significant groove where the seal lip runs. So difficult then to obviously keep it nice and sealed and keep the dirt from coming in and contaminating the grease. The fact that when you take the bearings, so when we take the bearings off here and we look at the bearings, they've lost their sheen. So the bearings have actually now gone dull. And that's basically the case hardening, lack of lubrication, heat buildup, which has caused this to be a bearing which we would definitely change. But now when I put the bearing on, and you'll see there's actually the inner race is loose, and that inner part there, that's the part that actually turns on the stub axle, and it shouldn't. So you can get away with putting something like a bearing lock on there and pushing the bearing on. It's like a glue which will actually hold it in place. But long term, when you're looking at this, you've got to make a decision: is will the seal actually seal? And that's what we have to clean up. We have to clean that surface up there and see whether the seal will actually be good enough to run on that surface there. And then also, if we're going to put the bearings, we don't want to find much play here. And if I take the other bearing, the outer bearing, and we look at the outer bearing, so the grease is a bit more contaminated, and you can see it on there as well. Again, heat breakdown. And same thing here, the bearings have actually discolored. So a bearing will go, it'll lose its sheen, it'll start going brown and eventually blue from heat. And if you're taking your bearing and you want to feel it, you can actually feel is it smooth? This is still smooth, but because the rollers have started to tarnish, this is time to change the bearings. And really it's about maintenance. If you maintain your bearings, and again, you need to make sure that this is okay. It's not too bad. It's actually a bit loose on the shaft there. Okay, so the decision we've really got to make here is: do we change the whole rear casing? And this is the problem with the Toyotas, is that the stub axle doesn't bolt off. So you've got to make a call. This is an expensive component to change. Now, fitting the bearings, a new set of bearings on here, fitting the seals, the terrain tamer seal works slightly differently. A traditional seal will turn on this stub axle, and the terrain tamer seal, it's a seal within a seal. So there's less likelihood of the dirt coming in. A new set of bearings, maybe a bit of bearing lock on the surface, just to make sure that the inner race of the bearing doesn't turn. And yes, sometimes you can get away with using it. And again, you're going to monitor it and check it and make sure what is the wear like. And traditionally every 20,000 kilometers you should be pulling your bearings apart, re-greasing them, checking the components, checking the stub axle, checking for wear, and make a call. If you had the budget, you just put a new axle casing in and go, you know what, the car's done 500,000 kilometers, I'm going to replace this axle casing for whatever it costs, it's worth doing. And that's the call we are looking at making when we're trying to make decisions on this truck. Can this go? We'll check the other side, see how bad that is, and then decide, could we use this depending on where you're going to travel, the length of trips, and we'll take it from there and make a call. So yeah, this is the guts of what we're finding now, is what you can't see from a visual inspection. Okay, so I'm looking at other components. The brake shoes on the other side actually were not in bad condition. They are worn. We will change them. In fact, there's an upgrade kit that Terrain Tamer does to make the handbrake a little bit more efficient. So that's an easy replace. The brake pads were brand new, and so were the discs. If I put the disc here, these are brand new discs. You can see because they're still nice and silver and shiny, and there's no ridge inside here for the handbrake, but they've got a slight brown tinge to them, and that brown tinge basically shows that there's been some heat go through these brakes. So even with a vehicle like this that's empty and the brakes have been used on a mountain pass or something, again, if the vehicle didn't engage enough engine braking, or the mountain pass was too long, you can still damage discs and put too much heat through them. So discs will go brown and eventually blue, and then it can distort, and especially if you hit any water, you can warp a disc. So it's important that these discs could be machined. I'm a believer, if you're going to add weight to a vehicle and it's going to be an overland vehicle, where possible, spend your money on the safety. And the safety items for us would be to upgrade the brakes. So you can get better quality brake discs and pads. You can get better quality brake hoses, which are braided. It's not too expensive in the bigger picture. Your truck needs to stop. And if you can improve that, that might just be the saving grace for you on one situation. So worth its money. So here we're looking at the stub axle on the other side. And again, we've still got that groove. It's a significant groove, but again, we'll need to measure it up and check it. The bearing pushed on. Also, a little bit more play than the other side, but it's, it would be more ideal to change this axle based on the mileage. And again, it's a question of how we're going to use this vehicle. This one has got significantly more play. So in the ideal world, I would really like to change this axle casing based on two reasons. One is that it's a truck that's done 500,000 kilometers, and if we were building this for someone to go right up into Africa for a year or more, 6 months, long travel, weighted with a lot of water, fuel tanks being full, possibly going through thick sand, mud, water, then you really want your bearings to be in top condition. It's another critical component that takes a lot of wear and tear. Now you must think how the bearings work really hard, the suspension works hard, the brakes work hard. That's where we want to spend our money before we start doing the niceties on the truck. Right, so coming to the front axle, this is where a lot more wear and tear takes place, especially on these front swivel housings. Most times when you come to the swivel housing, this is all corroded and rusted. And of course there's a seal that keeps it clean and keeps the dust and water out. You've got your CV joint in here. You've got a very small seal that stops the oil from the differential coming into this CV joint housing here. So you're separating the grease and the oil. Sometimes you'll find that seal fails, and then you'll find this grease ends up in the diff oil. And normally you'll check that when you drain your diff oil and it's grey, you'll know the CV joint grease is actually permeated through into the diff oil, and that's not good because that wears the case hardening on the front, on the teeth of the differential. So this is the seal we always change. These little bearings on the top here, top and bottom, these are your pivot bearings, and the whole wheel turns on these. Now, it's difficult to see, but the bearings normally have lines running from top to bottom, and the reason they have that is because 90% of the time you're probably driving in a straight line, and that bearing knocks itself out. So if I take that small bearing and I turn it into the shaft, what's going to happen is this little bearing here, and I'll be able to feel it's notching. So if I turn it like this, I can feel it notching on the actual wear marks, because these rollers have actually over the time banged down and actually caused little grooves on that. So these are something you always change, plus all the seals and gaskets here, definitely that seal there. But while we strip this out, it's also to look at your CV joint. Now, when you're looking at a CV joint, we'd need to wash this out completely. We'd need to clean out all the grease so we can inspect inside. We pull it apart completely, and then we look at the wear inside here, and we also look at the wear on the splines to see both ends. The spline on the actual that goes into the differential, and the spline here for the end cap. So that's important to check, because these do take wear, and it's only through completely cleaning it can you get a proper inspection on what's happening in there. So like we have on the rear, we've got the front stub axles, and when you take these stub axles and clean them up and look at them, we can actually see the blue here. So this bluing is actually shown. There's a lot of heat has come through here from a bearing. The bearings sit on here, so the bearing will push onto here, and the two bearings, but there's been a lot of heat go through here, and that's worrying because the heat has probably also come, you get heat coming from your brakes, gets transferred to this whole housing. Of course, the grease can deteriorate from the heat. It's important you use very good quality grease, should we say. But now that we've pulled this apart, we want to make sure that the bearings absolutely will run and not turn on these. And these are not too expensive to change. Again, we're going to look at the grooves. There's not a significant groove here. It's not too sharp, so the bearing hasn't eaten into the side here too much. But again, these are changeable. The determination of whether I change it or not is going to be looking for wear with the bearings going on here to see if they're worn. And if they are worn, again, the mileage on the truck often justifies changing them. And that's the concern. We've got a lot of blue there. So this is something we will definitely change. So now we're on the other side, the driver's side. And this is what we've noticed. They've actually welded the lower shock, the lower shock mount here. So this shock mount right from the bottom has got a weld all the way up here, all the way across, and it's obviously fractured this section off, and not really a great weld either. We need to understand whether this is actually needs to be re-welded stronger, and if we were in Africa and we had to make a repair, that's okay. You can fix these sort of things. You can weld them up and strengthen them, and it'll work. And again, if we had to decide we wanted to use this and it's properly welded, it's never ideal. I mean, it's a shock absorber mount, it's a safety element. Most ideal is to go, change the axle casing, because we've got these very significant, probably wear and tear from the shock absorber being broken. If a shock absorber bush goes and you keep driving it, that metal on metal pounding puts a lot of stress. And stress causes fractures, and when metal is old and tired, that stress fracture will eventually crack and break it, and that's exactly what's happened here. So it's really important to make sure that when you do your inspection on the car and you're looking at your shock absorbers, check the bushes. It's often that we find people's bushes are not in good condition. The lower bushes have knocked through, there's movement, you don't pick it up, and that vibration, that stress, that banging metal on metal transfers through all these little components, and you'll get something like this crack. Again, we'll check the bearings out in the hub. We'll look through the CV joints. We're going to wash these CV joints out, and we will check the stub axles. to inspect them and make sure that the bearings are running properly on these surfaces. And if there's too much play, we'll change it. If it's still okay, no problem, we can reuse it.
In the episodes ahead, we will show you how we got around replacing the entire rear axle. If you would like to download the entire series right now from front to end, click the link in the description.